Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And could I begin, as we all come back to Parliament, to welcome colleagues, of course, but to say how good it is to see the BBC Scotland's political editor, Glenn Campbell, in the press gallery. Glenn is a formidable interviewer, but he is rightly respected by his colleagues and those he reports on. And I know I speak for every MSP from every party in wishing him and his family well in the journey ahead. Presiding Officer, last week I called on the First Minister to rise to the big challenges that Scotland is facing today, to ditch the discredited agenda of his predecessor and to be his own man. Yet what we've heard today is very much the same as before. Far from the bold programme for Scotland that we were promised, we're getting the same tinkering around the edges on our public services. Consultations and trials rather than promises and delivery. Extreme green policies that will devastate our economy and rural communities. And of course, very predictably, the overwhelming focus on the SNP's obsession with independence. In this statement, we've just heard from the First Minister, and they're laughing, independence got a mention before education, before the NHS, before the economy. Humza Yousaf's already told us it's going to be line 1, page 1 of the SNP manifesto, and it's right up there at the front of the programme for government. It could be so much better than this. With a £60 billion budget, the support of thousands of civil servants, this is the best that Nicola Sturgeon's prodigy can do. Where's the urgency, the ambition, the action? After 16 years of SNP government, our children get a worse education than we did. When they leave school, they will have reduced access to higher education and fewer good job opportunities. And when they grow old, they'll be waiting longer for life-saving ambulances or on an NHS waiting list for essential treatment. This reheated programme for government and the proposals within it show that Humza Yousaf's government have done nothing to reverse the decline that we have seen over 16 years of an SNP government. When Scotland needed a national government, we've once again been given a nationalist government. Instead of speaking to Scotland, Humza Yousaf would rather be marching alongside flag-waving independence diehards like he was at the weekend. He would rather be campaigning, as he himself did, the self-titled first activist, than governing as First Minister. And this programme reflects that. But turning to the detail that we've just heard this afternoon, there are some slim positives we'd like to focus on. We welcome the commitment to finally tackle unsafe cladding. My colleagues Graham Simpson and Miles Briggs have been campaigning for action on this for many, many months. And it's right that action will now be taken to mirror the legislation that was introduced by Michael Gove in the UK Government back in March. Before this next one, I'd like to remind the Chamber of my register of interest as the husband of a practising police officer. So we also welcome the pay deal that's been reached with the police and that body-worn cameras will be introduced. In addition, on this side of the Chamber, we welcome the commitment to the rollout of childcare from 9 months in line with the proposals of the UK Government that were announced in the last budget. However, that is where the praise for this programme for government from Humza Yousaf ends, because much of the programme was committed by his predecessor. Far from relaunching his premiership, this programme digs in deeper into the mud of Nicola Sturgeon's policy failures. We were promised that this would be a plan of Humza Yousaf's first real opportunity to show what his own priorities are. Yet after half a year in office, he has literally just continued where we've been before. Instead, it's business as usual from this continuity government and continuity First Minister. It's also a programme that's a lot of talk and very little action. So let's look at some of the talk that we heard from the First Minister. He was patting himself on the back by telling us all that he'd developed a new and stronger relationship with business. So how's that been judged, First Minister? Well, this week, the Fraser of Allender Institute found that only 9% of Scottish businesses believe that his government understands them. What a reset. 9% of businesses in Scotland thinks Humza Yousaf and his government understands them. and only 8% think it is listening effectively to their sectors. He's not even listening now, but he's certainly not listening to businesses when 8% in that survey say this government has closed its ears to them. There were no commitments in this programme for government to pass on the business rates relief that we've seen in England and Wales to help struggling shops, pubs and hotels. And he also spoke about supporting a thriving tourism sector by shutting it down. By shutting it down. Because unlike the majority of the First Minister's colleagues, I was outside listening to bed and breakfast owners this afternoon who are saying that the legislation that's been passed that will come in, if there is no further delay, on the 1st of October is going to close them down. The short-term lets legislation is going to wreak havoc in the tourism industry across Scotland. And the deaf ears on the government benches is going to see these businesses closed. And I think the First Minister should be ashamed and accept he has got this wrong again. It was right there was a pause for 6 months to look at how the legislation could be improved. His government did nothing in that time. And if he will not come forward in the next week to accept the failures of this legislation and announce a further pause, then the Scottish Conservatives will force a vote on that issue next week, because we need to listen to these businesses who are going to stop, who are going to go out of business. We are listening to them on this side. He is ignoring them. Let's ensure that their voice is heard in this Parliament, and I hope that colleagues on the government benches will also listen to their constituents. Now, just last week, Deputy Presiding Officer, the Scottish Conservatives published our own bold and ambitious plan to grow Scotland's economy, to make Scotland more competitive within the United Kingdom, deliver a national workforce plan and tackle regional imbalances through innovation and entrepreneurship. I would gladly give way to Mr Stewart.
Kevin Stewart.
Mr Ross talks about a bold economic plan published by the Conservatives, but that plan does not include dealing with Brexit, which has stymied our economy and destroyed many people's lives. What does he have to say about that?
Douglas Ross.
I made it very clear when I announced this plan last week that we are looking not just for the coming months, the coming years, but the coming decades, because we know there are very scary warnings about the future of Scotland's economy, not from opposition parties, but from the Scottish Fiscal Commission, who said in the next 50 years, Scotland, to just get the services we have at the moment, won't have the income to deliver that. So we are looking into the future. Kevin Stewart and others can look into the past, but we need to be far more positive. We need to ensure that we grow Scotland's economy. And from high-tax Humza and the SNP, we'll never get that with this current SNP government. Because there were opportunities last week, and there are still opportunities now, for the First Minister to take on board the practical recommendations to show that jobs and businesses really are his priority. Yet, the First Minister continues to be led by the extremist Greens who don't believe in a wealthier Scotland. They want to shut down our North Sea oil and gas sector as soon as possible, despite the sector supporting tens of thousands of Scottish jobs and contributing over £9 billion to Scottish public spending. What the SNP and the Greens don't seem to realise is that it would devastate communities across the north of Scotland if we were to withdraw from the North Sea, but it would also remove the biggest source of investment and skills for the development of renewable energy projects in Scotland. The First Minister should abandon his predecessor's position, pull rank on his Green coalition partners and back Scotland's oil, or else there will not be an SNP MP left in the north east of Scotland after the next election. And I don't hold out much hope for the SNP MPs in that area, because we got one mention, Deputy Presiding Officer, of oil and gas in the First Minister's statement. Do you know how many mentions of oil and gas there are in the accompanying documents? Zero. Not one mention of this key sector for the north of Scotland, for the whole of Scotland, for the United Kingdom, in the accompanying documents to this programme for government. And I think that tells you everything you need to know about this First Minister's priorities. There was a discussion about infrastructure. So we are in a debate, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I'm very keen to take an intervention from the First Minister at any point, but particularly now, because he made a very clear commitment that this Scottish Government, his Scottish Government, will fully dual the A9 from Perth to Inverness. So I say to the First Minister, when? Nothing. Well, I'll give way. I mean, this is a serious issue. The First Minister inserts this into his programme for government and claims this is a big announcement, but there's nothing to back it up. This is a crucial infrastructure project that is absolutely vital for Perthshire and the Highlands of Scotland, indeed for connectivity across our country. We had the highest death rate on that road last year in 20 years, and the First Minister can't say when his promise will be delivered. He mentions the A96, and we've gone from the SNP saying they would fully dual the A96 to say there will be improvements. Now, I welcome the Nairn bypass and the improvements from Inverness to Nairn that's been mentioned, but the A96 goes from Inverness to Aberdeen. What about the rest of that route? Previously promised to be fully dualled, now we're only going to get improvements along the way. Nothing in the programme for government about a long-term solution for the landslides on the A83. And we heard that there's going to be 6 new ferries delivered in the next couple of years. Well, the current couple are already 6 years late, so I don't hold out much hope for that either. In the time remaining, Deputy Presiding Officer, I want to look at some of the other issues. It just got a fleeting mention from the First Minister. First of all, the NHS. He's promised that he's going to make it easier and it will be more accessible for patients to see their GPs. The first thing that would be quite good is if his Health Secretary, who I don't think is in the chamber today, would actually meet with GPs. Sorry, I missed Mr Matheson there. I mentioned Mr Matheson. I mentioned Mr Matheson because he has refused to meet with GP campaigners in my local area. I've written to him several times. They got in touch with me again to say they'd had a disappointing letter back from Mr Matheson. We've got campaigners trying to keep surgeries open in Burghead and Hopeman. He's not willing to meet with them either. And I thought it was quite interesting that the First Minister mentioned the NHS today and what he's doing to improve the NHS on the day that it was confirmed there are now 820,000 Scots on an NHS waiting list. A new record, 820,000. Now, back in March, when that number had dropped, the First Minister said it was heartening that this waiting list was going down. It's now increased by 51,000, so I'll give way this time to the First Minister if he'll tell us what his response is to waiting number of Scots on a waiting list, 820,000, up 51,000 at their record level. Is that heartening?
I'm happy to.
First Minister.
Thank you for the invitation to contribute. What I would say to Douglas Ross is, of course, for every single person that is waiting too long, we don't want them to wait so long. That is why, of course, increasing wages for social care workers is so important to help with the recovery of our NHS. What doesn't, of course, and what would never have helped our NHS in terms of its waiting list, in terms of waiting times, is if we had industrial action like, of course, other parts of the UK have seen, especially where the Conservatives are in charge. And I hope Douglas Ross, with any marginal influence he'll have, will ask Steve Barclay to take up Michael Matheson's offer so that we can mediate and ensure that junior doctors in England get paid fairly, just as they are here in Scotland.
Douglas Ross, I can give you the time back.
I can't believe they're actually applauding that. There you have it. The response to NHS waiting lists in Scotland being at their record level, up 51,000, 820,000 Scots on a waiting list in Scotland, and that is the dismal response you get from Scotland's First Minister. I will rush through the last couple of things I wanted to mention. The First Minister puts in his statement that he is willing to work with other parties. Then please, work with me, work with Scottish Conservatives, Scottish Labour supporters, Scottish Liberal Democrats, and I know SNP supporters who backed the Right to Recovery Bill. Yes, we saw a reduction in the number of deaths in 2022, but we are still the worst in the United Kingdom and, by a large margin, the worst in Europe. In his statement, the First Minister endorsed the bill of Gillian Mackay. He could do the same right now and say he is backing the Right to Recovery Bill. Backing it 100%, and SNP members will vote for it.
First Minister,
Douglas Ross, for giving way. First and foremost, I haven't seen the detail of the bill. If Douglas Ross has published it, then I'm more than happy to see the detail. When I met with Douglas Ross ahead of summer. He said it would be published by summer recess. It's not been published. He's obviously still working on the detail. And what I would say to Douglas Ross, on that point of influence, if he can please ensure that the UK government take an evidence-based approach, and where they're not willing to be radical and bold, at least devolve the powers to us so we can take forward safer drug consumption facilities.
It's very clear the First Minister in his programme for government statement could back Gillian Mackay's bill, which is not as at an advanced stage as my current bill is, so he could surely do the same for right to recovery. The last two issues I want to speak about is an agriculture bill. Speaking about the meeting that we had back in the summer, Humza Yousaf promised me that there was going to be an agriculture bill coming to this Parliament before the Highland Show. He was telling me this was a big show in Edinburgh that lasts a couple of days. I know it actually lasts 4 days and I've been to every year. But the point is, the agriculture bill was promised before the summer recess. We still heard no more about it. It's going to be another year. Farmers and crofters are crying out for it, and I know Rachel Hamilton's going to say more about that in her speech later on. Finally, Humza Yousaf mentioned support for the police, and I've already recognised the welcomed the pay deal that has been reached today. But the comments about the police come from Humza Yousaf, someone who wanted the police to investigate a hoax video, but now doesn't seem to want them to investigate real crimes. That's what we heard in the north east of Scotland yesterday. This is the direction of travel from this SNP government and justice under them. Presiding Officer, today's statement could have delivered so much for Scotland. It had the opportunity to reset the agenda with business, with the economy, on our NHS and education. In all areas, it has failed. It is continuity from a continuity First Minister. It should be and could be so much better. And over the coming year, the Scottish Conservatives will scrutinise what comes forward and will come up and offer the real alternatives to focus on the real priorities of people across Scotland.